Hello, welcome to the channel. Jim Reads Too Slow. I'm Jim, and this is my wrap up for week 3 of February Fantasy Stories, or FFS, which is, of course, an event organized by the Bookish Bryants to encourage the reading of fantasy stories. We're reading short fiction, mostly works under 250 pages, mostly short stories. So, to catch up, week 1 was dedicated to classic fantasy. Anything in the genre published before 1971. I read some Ursula K. Le Guin. I enjoyed all of her work that I read. Lord Dunsany, same. Clark Ashton Smith, and I even read an Edith Wharton story. Enjoyed everything that I read during that first week. Week 2 was Swords and Sorcery. I read mostly Robert E. Howard stories, mostly Conan the Cimmerian, but also I read a Solomon Kane story, all originally published in the pulp magazines in the late 1920s and through the 1930s. Okay, so week 3, this past week, this was dedicated to dark fantasy. So what is dark fantasy? I should say that I left out consideration of the grimdark subgenre just because, based on its defining characteristics that I was able to hear and read and whatever, it appears to be something that I wouldn't at all be interested in. So, the quick Wikipedia definition of dark fantasy is fantasy that includes disturbing and frightening themes, elements of horror, ominous tones, gloomy, dark, sense of horror, dread, terror, anti-heroes, morally ambiguous protagonists, that sort of thing. In short, it was stories that were much the same as the stories that I read during week 2. So for week 3, I read book 1 in the Elric Saga by Michael Moorcock, Elric of Melnibone. This was originally published in 1972, and it is the first Elric novel, although shorter works had been published in magazines throughout the 1960s. This is a prequel detailing how Elric came to possess his sword, his sentient, soul-eating black sword, Stormbringer. It's a fun story. I thought it was well written. I read the 1987 Ace edition, which came in at 192 pages. Moorcock packed a lot of action and story into that 192 pages. Excuse me. Ginger ale. Elric is an albino. I don't know if that really has anything to do with anything, but at the beginning of the book, he's a sickly young man who relies on drugs to stay alive because of his weak blood. He is the emperor of Melnibone, an island inhabited by non-human mortals, a race who at one time had ruled the entire known world. But gradually, over time, their civilization has grown more decadent. Their power has shrunk, dwindled down to where they pretty much control just this one island nation of Melnibone. The humans who they once ruled, and who now are referred to as the Young Kingdoms, they hate them. They resent them. They lust after their riches, and they have begun testing their defenses, making raids, forays, attacks against this island in an attempt to I guess, probe for weaknesses. Now, I should stop right now and say that, as is probably obvious, I have no idea how any of the names in this book are actually supposed to be pronounced. Um, so I'm just going to say the few names, as few as possible, um, in the way that I heard them in my head. And if I make a fool out of myself or if I do it wrong, um, please correct me kindly, if you would. So back to the recap. Elric is a relatively new emperor of Melnibone. He is kind of an odd duck as far as his countrymen go. He seems to have a sense of morality, and he doesn't really want to be emperor. He hates his country's traditions, and he has some inkling that things can't continue forever the way they are. Whereas his people are dedicated to their traditions, which include, on special occasions, wholesale murder, even cannibalism, a lot of partying. They seem to just feel that whatever feels good is right, and screw everybody else because everybody else is not Melnibonian, and they're all that counts. They can't even let themselves imagine any other way. So Eldric's way of thinking kind of makes even his friends uneasy. It makes his enemies want to get rid of him. But Elric also is a powerful sorcerer, powerful enough to give his enemies pause. They're not going to try anything outright. So against this backdrop, one day Elric and his navy sail off to wage war against these human forces from the Young Kingdoms who have launched an attack on their island. He wins the battle, the war, whatever it is, but in the process, his cousin, Yurkun, who is also a powerful sorcerer and who really wants to be emperor, sees his opportunity and murders Elric. But, and I don't think it's much of a spoiler, as he is drowning, Elric unconsciously calls out to his friends among the water elementals, and they rescue him. So, when Yurkun triumphantly arrives back in Melnibone, having proclaimed himself the new emperor, and planning to marry his sister and make her empress, Silmaril, yuck, who does he meet in the throne room? Elric. Gasp. This is so unfair, he yells. You're supposed to be dead. Yurkun is then arrested, taken to his tower to be held prisoner until the festivities that evening. Elric has finally decided that maybe he should actually clamp down a little bit and behave more traditionally, more like a traditional emperor. And so he has planned these festivities at which Yurkun is going to be forced to eat one of his treacherous lieutenants, tiny bit by tiny bit through the evening, and then be exiled. But Yurkun escapes with a group of his loyal supporters. And as he escapes, he kidnaps his sister, Silmaril, who, by the way, is the love of Elric's life, and his betrothed, who will soon be, or at some point in the future, it is assumed she will become Elric's empress. So, Elric sends out his forces in search of his cousin and his kidnapped sister. He's unsuccessful. That is until he calls on Arioch, who is a powerful demon, a lord of hell. He calls on him for aid. He becomes his patron demon, I guess. And Elric becomes his loyal servant. But Yurkun isn't just hiding out. He's building an army of brainwashed soldiers. He's also building a navy of stolen ships and he intends to invade Melnibone uh, and seize the throne. He's also making arrangements with various of his demon friends to locate and take possession of these two swords that were created by the forces of chaos eons ago, Mournblade and Stormbringer, which, if he finds them, he will be invincible. The swords are located in a cavern somewhere under a swamp in a shadow realm, kind of a limbo. So, Elric and his forces finally find and attack Yurkun and his forces. Big battle. Yurkun is defeated and disappears, but not before he casts a spell on his sister, putting her to sleep, a spell that only he will be able to lift. Most of Elric's forces are killed in this victory, but he survives, and he goes off in search of Yurkun, who by this time has entered the Shadow Gate, into this shadow realm. Arioch wants Elric to get the swords before Yurkun does, because he says that if Yurkun gets them, he's going to destroy everything. So, creepy trek through the Shadow Realm to an even creepier tunnel. The tunnel is described kind of in terms of some kind of alimentary canal, complete with sphincters. But eventually, Elric gets through to the cavern. And who does he meet there? That's right, Yurkun. Yurkun catches sight of Elric, and of course, he starts whining. No, not fair. These are my swords. But the demons have their way of working things out. And so each of them gets a sword, and they fight it out. Elric, of course, wins. He takes possession of Stormbringer. The other sword disappears. And he is flooded with vitality. Stormbringer has eliminated his need for these life-sustaining drugs that he has to take. And in the course of the fight, Elric also comes to believe that he has achieved mastery over Stormbringer. Has he really? This is the first Elric story I've ever read, so I don't know. The story was exciting, though. I did really enjoy it. It's well written, even thought-provoking in places. I could not have hoped for a better fantasy novel for this week. And like I said, a lot was packed into 192 pages. Would I recommend it? Yes, I would. Excuse me. I could easily have read more of these stories, and I probably would have, if not for the fact that my wife and I also got sick this past week. So we spent most of our time coughing and sleeping and being drowsy and drinking plenty of fluids. So maybe another time. But that was week 3. We now enter week 4, which is dedicated to urban fantasy. Now, this is a subgenre I don't ever remember reading any of, so this will be a new adventure for me also. I'll be reading stories from Jim Butcher's short story collection, Side Jobs, from the Dresden Files universe. And I've never, as I said, read any of his stories before. So if any of you have any information that I should know as I'm getting into it, please let me know in the comments. I'm again entering entirely new territory, which I guess is the whole purpose of this reading event. So we'll see how that goes. So that's the close of this week. Until next time, thank you very much, BookTube.